I settle into my chair with no little trepidation. These are the moments when it's truth or dare, and the truth is, I almost dare not press the button today. It's been an emotional fortnight. Sometimes you forget where you are. Sometimes you're blinded by the lights. The red ones. The ones that make everything virtual so you can't feel the ground. Sometimes you ride the dragon, meine Freunde. Sometimes the dragon rides you. And I'll tell you all about it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. I don't know. Okay, I'll stop doing that voice. My noir voice. I changed now from my noir voice into my podcast voice, which is not my real voice, but at this moment in time, like my noir voice said, sometimes you forget where you are, and I don't know where I am right now, kids. It has indeed been an emotional fortnight. It was an emotional weekend. It was a weekend of intense emotional experience. And let's talk about the good ones, all right? Let's talk first and foremost about the good emotions that spilled out of me, quite literally in liquid form, after Arsenal's last second 3-2 victory over the old enemy, Manchester United, on Sunday afternoon. You don't understand, kids. All right, you don't understand what it has demanded of you, of me, of all of us, to be an Arsenal supporter over the past 10 years, nearly 20 freaking years since Arsenal last won the Premier League. And since then, it's all gone upside down, man. Now, there was a point in time in the early days of the Premier League and into the early 2000s where there were two giants, all right? Those giants were Manchester United and Arsenal. It is considered the great rivalry of the Premier League era. And there was a period of time, several years, where those two sides were trading the title back and forth. And it was intense, beyond the kind of intensity that most of us really understand. Those of us who are fans of North American sports, it was, and I can't even claim personal experience of this, all right? I came on board with Arsenal sometime after this, after the landscape had dramatically changed, all right? Now, I was an Arsenal supporter from a distance, but it wasn't until the early 2000s, beyond that actually, closer to 2010, when you could actually access the games, right? So there used to be, on Sportsnet or whatever, the Premier League game of the week, and it was two teams you didn't care about anyhow, right? And that was it. That's all the access you had. It was not until later, when specialty channels came along, and suddenly we began to have access so that we could support for real. And then there was fan media, and then there was the online media, and suddenly you could immerse yourself in the team in the way that actual fans could in the city, in the stadium, in the grounds, right? And I had no real experience of this, all right? I've had highs. I have had a few highs. Andre Arshavin's goal against Barcelona in the Champions League was one of the great moments. It was the moment when I knew, deep in my heart, I was not just an Arsenal fan of the mind. I was an Arsenal fan of the heart in that moment. And it was such a magnificent moment. You know, sports have a unique ability. I have talked in the past about music having a unique ability to invoke memory. Sports have a unique ability to invoke moments. Moments, man. The reason, and a lot of people who don't get sports don't understand the rampant, aggressive tribalism that goes with fandom. They don't understand that it's all about those moments, right? And for Arsenal, for so many years, the moments have been, 3 FA Cup wins aside, mostly heartbreaking, all right? Stuff going against us. Robin van Persie's red card for a BS call against Barcelona in the Champions League. All of the crushing losses, all of the falling apart, all of watching this new breed of super rich super team come into vogue. Now, this began really with Chelsea in the early 2000s, taken over by Roman Abramovich. And suddenly, that cat started pumping money into player purchases that was way beyond what seemed reasonable or had been experienced before. And then all of a sudden, ownership groups came in that took over some of these clubs, and the arms race became crazy intense. And the Arsenals of the world could hang, but couldn't get over the mountain. You know what I mean? So you could reach the top 4, and Arsenal did that for 20 years very comfortably, but you couldn't get over the line. You could not compete on a financial level with the giants. All right, now United still had the legacy. They kept winning, but slowly but surely over time, Chelsea began to dominate. Then Manchester City came along from nowhere. Manchester City was nobody from nowhere. The ugly, red-headed stepchild of Manchester United. You know, on the other side, the blue half of Manchester. But then they got bought out by like a nation state. And big oil money came into Manchester City. And then all of a sudden, where the best teams in the Premier League could field a world-class first 11, Manchester City, with their endless resources, over time, began to be able to field a team of world-class starters, and on the bench, a team of world-class substitutes. And from 2010 to now, City basically took over, but now Newcastle awaits on the horizon because they were bought out by a conglomerate worth something to the tune of £300 billion. And so they've already begun rising, Newcastle's like 3rd, 4th, 5th. And so it begins. And yet you have plucky little Arsenal, all right? Not going to say Arsenal is not a wealthy team. I'm not going to say that Arsenal is not a giant of world football. Arsenal is both of those things, but they have not been able to spend their way to the top of the table like other teams. And after their legacy manager, Arsene Wenger, manager of the invincible side that went unbeaten, no team has ever done that, kids. He was hounded out of the club basically after results fell apart toward the end of the teens. And that was partially not being able to keep up financially, partly making some bad transfer decisions. Side fell apart. Wenger left. Arsenal has been adrift of the Champions League since. And then along comes, and I've talked about this too, along comes young firebrand, former club captain Mikel Arteta, given his first managerial job at one of the biggest clubs in world football. And people went, what? How can you give a guy with no management experience, never managed a club, we're going to give him Arsenal? What? That's like if you had never coached hockey before and your first job is the Canadiens, right? The greatest team of all time. And you're dropped into that position. And it was rough, kids. All right? Arsenal fans, in this transition, there had been a manager in between. Arsene Wenger left. Unai Emery was hired. It was not good. He was fired. Then it's Arteta. Young, inexperienced, promising. Bit of a maverick move, man. Bit of a maverick move. Bit of a gamble. And it was rough. All right? He teetered on the edge of being fired for a long time. He's been at the club like 3 years now. And for 2 of those years, it was freaking dicey, man. And they had to roll out a lot of players and they had to bring in a lot of new players. And what they've done is they have built the youngest club in the Premier League. All right. They have stocked that team with youth academy graduates who are turning into stars, with young players who were bought relatively inexpensively before anybody else could get their hands on them. Shrewd signings, young signings. And the idea was they were going to build this project into a winner the old-fashioned way, because we do not have the money to do it the way modern teams do it. We got more money than almost everybody, but not enough to really challenge those top clubs, right? So we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way, kids. We're going to have to be a little bit shrewd about it. Going to have to get younger. Going to have to get cheaper. Going to have to get more talented. And they did that. And the project began to show signs of life. And then something outrageous happened. This perfect storm whereby Arsenal entered this season and just started winning. Made a couple of smart moves in the summer to bring in a couple of very experienced and very important players who have been giant for us. And we started to win. And as we were doing that, other teams that are kind of at our level, your Liverpools, let's say, began to trail off, all right? They were at the top of the mountain. They aged over it. They began to fall away. And then Chelsea, the despicable, well, their owner was a Russian oligarch. And didn't his buddy Putin attack Ukraine? And then it was the least fashionable thing in the world to be a Russian oligarch in England. And Abramovich had to sell Chelsea, all right? Had to sell, so instant disarray. And City, the much maligned, for whatever reason, despite their 2 rows deep of world superstars, just ain't been playing all that well, man. All right, they win the Premier League every year, but for some reason this year, it just hasn't quite been there. And Newcastle on the rise, the richest club in world football, ain't quite there yet. And what do you get? You get this young, exciting, talented Arsenal team finding itself riding the wave of a perfect storm whereby they are winning, other teams are losing, and suddenly you find yourself halfway through the season and Arsenal sits atop the Premier League table with a 5-point cushion. Now, going into the game against United, having last weekend beaten our most bitter rivals, Tottenham Hotspuds, at their building, 2-0. Come into this game against United. United, who is finding their way back to the top 2. All right, United is playing well. United has a good manager. United has bought some players, all right? United is turning into United again. And Arsenal is turning into Arsenal again. And suddenly, it's 20 years ago. And the 2 giants have awoken from their slumber, and they stare across the pitch at each other with a title in their sights. Just like the old days, man. Just like the old days. Now look, I said I've had some emotional moments with the club, all right? But there's never really been a sense that we're on the cusp of anything. All right? City won their game on the weekend, closed the gap to 2 points. A lot of pressure on Arsenal to face a rising Manchester United team and win. And it was a seesaw game. It was riveting action. Those of us who are so inclined yelled at the television set and were told by their spouse or significant other to stop doing that. And it went back and forth. And in the final moments, it's 2-2. Arsenal needing a win to reestablish a 5-point cushion and to send the message to make a statement win that says, we're for real, kids. This ain't a blip. And in the 90th minute, the ball comes through to Academy graduate Eddie Nketiah, playing in place of the injured superstar striker Gabriel Jesus. And doesn't Nketiah flick that ball into the net for his second goal of the match to win it 3-2 for the Arsenal, to reestablish the 5-point lead atop the table, to send the message, not for the first time this year, that we are young and for real. And you don't care. I know you don't care, but I'm trying to establish a moment. All right? Because I jumped. And when your team does something like that, it's so exciting. After years of anguish, to feel yourself on the cusp of something, to feel like it's finally happening. Against all odds, man. Against all odds. Arsenal was not really supposed to be able to compete yet. And yet, here we are. And we're winning these games with clutch goals in the last moment. Playing beautiful liquid football with a spine. All right, with some steel holding us up under this tremendous pressure. And I did not realize, all right, I've always watched this from a safe distance. I've watched my team make Stanley Cup runs. Go Habs, go. I've watched them win in the finals. I've watched them lose in the finals. I have lived and I have died with the saga that is a playoff run. But I've never understood the intensity of a title chase in the Premier League until now, because Arsenal hasn't really been in one since I've been able to actually plug in and be part of the fan base. So after the game is over, there appears on YouTube a video by Gunner Blog himself. That's James. James is a co-host of the Arsenal Arscast, the Ars blog Arscast. If you go back to the early days of this program, the host of the Ars blog Arscast, Andrew Magan, was a guest on this program. You can hear all about how he built what was kind of the first really consequential fan media site, the Ars blog, and he turned that into a full-time freaking job, and he's been doing it for 20 years. Fascinating story, really, really great guy, and it was surreal to talk to him. So his co-host is James, Gunner Blog, and he does an after the whistle kind of response to the game every week, right? Every time there's a game, James pops up and he does 5, 6, 7 minutes. And he talks about the game as it was, whatever just happened on the pitch. Now get this. Arsenal defeats the old enemy 3-2 with a last gasp goal of magnificent drama. Again, I have had intense sporting experiences. All right? You watch your team make a cup run, it is crazy. I once attended a playoff game in Carolina. Habs playing Hurricanes. It was the year the Hurricanes won the cup. They knocked the Leafs out in the semifinals. I attended a playoff game, and it was like being at a siege. All right, now I'm in enemy territory. I am wearing my Canadiens jersey. Brave or what? And to be fair, all the Carolina fans were incredibly gracious, and it was really a fun atmosphere, but intense. So I'm walking along in my Habs jersey. I'm in the parking lot, and I see a pocket of other Habs jerseys over there, and there's an instant connection, man. There's an instant recognition of you, me. All right, we are in this together. And then before the game started, they're doing the pregame warm-up, right? And there's a small but intense band of Canadiens fans, like 50 of them. And they are down at the glass in the Canadiens' end as they're shooting the puck around, and they're banging on the glass, and they're supporting the team, and it brings a tear to your eye, man, warms your cockles. To begin to understand the intensity of emotion that goes into this weird, stupid tribalism that is really, I don't know, it's primordial. It exists. And that was probably the most intense experience I've had at a sporting event. And the Habs lost that game. It was heartbreaking. There was, as I recall, a stupid penalty for shooting the puck over the glass. No team should lose a playoff game on a stupid penalty for shooting the puck over the glass. That should just be a face-off in your own zone, all right? Not a penalty. I digress. That was an intense moment. But fast forward to last Sunday, and there's Gunner Blog, and he is at the game, all right? He's a journalist. He often has like a press pass. In this case, he's just at the Emirates Stadium in London, attending the game as a fan like everybody else. And so what he did as part of his post-game whistle was he actually showed some footage of the closing moments of the game. All right, so it's selfie mode. The camera is on him sitting in the crowd, 60,000 strong, and you can see the people around him and you can hear the people around him, and he is commentating the action that's on the pitch, right? And you can just see that it's life or death, and you can feel that emotion stirring. And then the game is over. The referee blows the whistle full time, and the crowd around Gunner Blog, around James, just goes crazy. And it's not just a jubilation. It's not just, hey, we won the game. There is a depth of emotion here that is beyond just a football match. There is something so, again, it's primordial. I'm getting choked up talking about it, man. You can see the people around him so proud, so happy, you know? And you read through the comments on this video, and everybody's like, oh, geez, I'm crying. I'm starting to cry. And you can see it in the crowd. People were crying that we had passed this enormous test and that we're still alive and that this is real. And James made the very good point that, after a couple of years of COVID, a couple of years of all of the stress and the anxiety and the awfulness, coupled with, 20 years of it being rough being an Arsenal fan, the combination of all those things, the catharsis of those things, the release of those things, it was emotionally overwhelming in the best possible way. And I literally teared up watching that crowd and feeling from my distance connected to that crowd, feeling as though I was there, feeling as though I was part of it. And it's so profound to me that he mentioned that in the context of COVID, like finally having something to be happy about, to be excited about, to cheer about, And it's true, man. And that brings me to the rest of my emotional fortnight. All right, now I talked last week about how the anxiety has been happening and what a crushing thing that can be. All right, and that persists. All right, and I'm working on it, and it's okay. Right? But I talked in my little intro, in my noir intro, I talked about sometimes you can forget where you are. And I've said before in the past, when I've talked about the kind of spiking anxiety that I encountered that bubbled up within me at the beginning of COVID, that's the link, man. James talking about COVID and how awful it's been and how repressed and how stressful and anxious, and then having this release at the Arsenal match. And there's a long way to go, kids, all right? I'm not crowning them champions yet. Nobody is. But it's so exciting to feel like Arsenal is back. And it's so exciting to ride this particular dragon, a title chase. And it's on and it's for real. And how exciting after, years of the team struggling and the last couple of years of the world struggling, to be caught up in an upsurge of joy and hope and emotion and release and catharsis about that is wonderful. And I hope they go on to win the thing. That would be, I can't even say. I've watched them win the FA Cup 3 times. I've never seen them win the Premier League. And that might necessitate a trip to London, England. But I like the tie that James made to COVID. All right, now the COVID, it unleashed something in me. All right, there had been something latent. I had had warning shots about anxiety as early as 2018. And then when the COVID came, it just blew up on me. All right, when the world went nuts, I went with it. And I tried real hard to center myself, and it's okay. It's okay, man. All right, I had a rough freaking time. But I always treat this now as a call, man. At the time, it felt like a call to surrender. It felt like a call to let go of ego. It felt like a call to believe in something beyond myself, to open myself up to it, to surrender to it. All right, and that's not easy to do when you're a frightened human and you run kind of from an ego base. But there was part of an ego destruction, and it's okay. But I get aftershocks, all right? And the last couple of weeks, I've had aftershocks. And what anxiety does that I've told you before, and I am not, by the way, turning this into an anxiety podcast. I'm just talking about what's real right now, okay? Because that's the question. What anxiety does is it puts you in a place that isn't reality, but it masks that fake reality so convincingly that you kind of freak out, man. All right? Anxiety will convince you that your worst fears are imminent. They're happening at this moment, or they are imminent. And it is not a thing you can think your way out of, all right? I talked about this last week. It's an emotional thing, and emotions override your mind 9 times out of 10, all right? It takes a master to have mind over emotions most of the time. I ain't a master, kids. So this anxiety begins to bubble up in me again. There are triggers here and there. And then anxiety will just put this film over you. It will put this film over your perception, a virtual reality. And that virtual reality is full of all of the most awful things you can think of. Whatever it is for you. You fear losing your job, or you fear losing your spouse, or you fear this, or you fear that. Whatever fear you have, it begins to appear as though it's reality. And you cannot escape that reality. And that just drives the fear, man. It's a loop. It's a freaking cycle. And, there are ways of pulling yourself out of that. And I'm still working on that stuff, man. But it's terrifying and it's awful. And people have panic attacks. And that is an almost complete loss of control of your body. Like your emotions when you have a panic attack just take over. Right? Like you may have a strong mind, but it gets obliterated. And then fight or flight kicks in for real, yo. That is a scary place to be, man. And, when they say all we have to fear is fear itself, fear's a pretty powerful thing to fear, man. This last couple of weeks, the anxiety has been flirting with me. It's been a little bit tough, man. And then that fake reality slips in and begins to take over, right? Anxiety goes on kind of the autopilot, and you can rationalize all you want, but this is not a rational thing. And so last weekend, I'm at a party, right? Went out to a little soiree, all right? Was a cluck off. Oh yeah, kids, was a cluck off. What's a cluck off? A cluck off is when a group of friends get together, and each of them brings a chicken dish, and they compete to see whose chicken dish is the best. If that ain't a cure for anxiety, I don't know what is. For the record, my spouse or significant other won that competition with an Asian-inspired dish that was truly fabulous. So I'm at the cluck-off, right? There's wine flowing. That's what happens at a cluck-off. And there are presentations happening of these dishes, and everybody's excited and they're in the moment. And I have surrounding me 15 or 20 of the people that I am extremely blessed and fortunate to have as part of my social circle. All right. They are mostly friends of my spouse. She plays sports with them. And then I play pickleball with a bunch of them now. It's a circle. I'm part of a circle, right? And so there was a moment when I'm watching the cluck off and I'm looking at the people, and people are drinking wine and people are laughing. And there's bright lights, and there's jokes, and everybody's feeling good. And it occurred to me that this is reality. Real reality. And sometimes you lose sight of that, all right? When you are having mental distress, whether that's depression or whether that's anxiety or whatever it is, you lose sight of what real reality is. And sometimes it's so helpful to have that represented to you. What is real reality? For the most part, real reality is lovely people having a lovely time. And you need to honor that, and you need to be grateful for that. And you need to recognize that this is real reality, all right? What anxiety would have you believe that your worst fears are imminent or happening is not real reality 99% of the time. Real reality is those people in your life. Real reality is those things that you love to do. Real reality, for the most part, is positive and okay and safe. And I had to be reminded of that. And a funny thing happens when you snap back into real reality after fighting your way through the fog of that awful red anxiety virtual reality, is you suddenly feel this release inside you. And it is the most wonderful and in some ways most challenging feeling, man. You feel warmth, warm cockles. And then you realize how tense you've been. You realize how uptight and how worried and how nervous and how scared. And this just becomes, it's like your normal setting. It becomes normal to you. You don't even realize anymore how tense you've been, how much pain, in some cases, physical pain, you've actually been feeling, until that releases. And sometimes the best way out of an anxiety, the best way out of a depression is to just be among people you enjoy and recognize that this is real reality and that this exists, all right? And to distract yourself just a little bit from ruminating about your anxious thoughts. You know, anxiety is all about the future. Anxiety is about a scary future that you cannot control. And it helps to be distracted from that. So engaging people in conversation, watching a cluck off, and then later, 4 tables of euchre sprung up, and I ain't ever seen cards go against me like that before. Talked about euchre, right? I'm a decent euchre player, my friends. Cards did not go my way, and that made me nuts, and it made me angry. And how wonderful is that? Rather be angry than scared. Gotta tell you that right now, man. And the wine was flowing, and that was nice. And it turned into a swell party, okay? And throughout the course of that party, I was distracted from the anxiety. I was distracted from the fear. And I was appreciating in ways that I haven't always just the people in my life. And that includes a lot of you, meine Freunde. Now, some of you listening out there, I don't actually know. And I thank you for listening. But a lot of you listening out there are my close friends and family. And I appreciate you guys, all right? Now, if you are in a place right now where you are anxious or you are depressed, think about putting yourself in a place where you can appreciate people, where you can appreciate your people. Sometimes you get worried about, geez, I'm going to die someday. This is a heavy episode, man. Sometimes you think about, I'm going to die someday, and have I wasted it all? And the thing is, we have all of us only so much time, but it's important to appreciate your time and place. You know what I mean? So you look around a room of people who are your friends or your family, whoever you are close to, and you think, it was my time to be here with those people, and what a privilege that is. And then we'll go on to the next life or whatever. But if you can just appreciate those people and appreciate this time and be distracted just a little bit from these agonizing thoughts and projections and catastrophizing, it can help you just break the spell a little bit, man. Anxiety is like a fever. Sometimes to break the fever, it just requires being distracted from it, appreciating what you can appreciate, people, whatever. And it's a lift, man. And it is one of the great feelings. I've talked about having gallbladder attacks before. And one of the great physical feelings you will ever feel is when a gallbladder attack ends. And it releases and the pain goes away. And just this relief and warmth washes over you like a nice bath. Well, breaking free from that fever of anxiety is like an emotional gallbladder attack ending. And you just feel it release and wash through you. And you almost want to weep. You almost want to weep for the joy of not feeling that anymore and realizing real reality again. Now, and you're not living in that weird masquerade anymore. And then the next day, your team, Arsenal, wins in such dramatic fashion and in such an emotional way at the midpoint of such an emotional season following such an emotional time. And it just kind of gushes through you, man. And of course you start crying when you watch fan footage of the crowd winning a football match. It sounds stupid on the surface, but when you dig into the context of it, oh yeah, it makes sense, man. We're having a release here. And heaven help us all, should the day come in 3 months or 4 months when Arsenal wins that thing. And I cannot imagine the release that will be. But it seems like a perfect storm right now, and I am going to ride that storm, baby. What am I trying to say? Anxiety sucks. That's what I'm trying to say. But there are ways to cope, all right? I'm still working on it. Maybe you're still working on it. Don't quit on it, all right? Recognize the illusion. Recognize that a false reality has been slipped in front of your sunglasses, man. And then find ways to pull yourself out of that false reality back into real reality. And then you cope, all right? Underneath it all is the emotional trigger, all right? I ain't gonna front, as cool people say. Underneath it all is a real emotional trigger, and the answer to anxiety is not to be distracted from it, all right? But a temporary relief from it in the form of distraction is so freaking welcome. And it reminds you of how life can actually be. There are triggers underneath all of that. There's a reason for the anxiety, and digging deeper into that, when you are grounded, when you feel in control again, the thing to do is to turn into that. All right, I saw a video by the great Jeff Thompson just the other day. Very, very timely, synchronicity. He was speaking about depression and how the game with depression is you have to lean into it. You have to feel the feelings. You have to invite the feelings, right? But not attached to the feelings, not attached to the stories. And that's the hard part, because the stories are your worst fears. Your body hears about your worst fears and it's ready to fight or flight or die. And all that cortisol and adrenaline just runs through you and things get tense, and then you begin to go out of control because it's a scary feeling. Fight or flight is a scary feeling. That's what it is, right? And so turning into that is not something you want to do because it's awful. But if you are in a grounded, centered, controlled position, you can begin to do that. Begin to explore those feelings. Begin to try to understand where they come from and recognize them as simply just an energy. I ain't no master at this, kids. I am still fighting every day to figure out how to do this. But I'm taking advice from people who have been there, people who know, and I'm trusting that advice. So when you're centered, you can begin to explore those feelings. And if you are not in therapy, get yourself to therapy, all right? Ain't no shame in that. It's been incredibly helpful for me. Even if you're not depressed or anxious, you just want to understand better how your brain works and what your motivations are and why. That's why I went into therapy in the first place. I couldn't figure out what I wanted, couldn't figure out what I was doing. And so I wanted an objective voice, and I wanted to be able to bounce some stuff around, jam with somebody. That's why I went to therapy, and then as luck would have it, anxiety happened. And good thing I had a therapist. So cool. So if you're not in therapy, do it. All right? If you can swing it, make it happen. And it will help and turn into some of these feelings when you are capable of doing so. There are moments when you just have to try to distract yourself and just break the spell, just break the fever. And then when the fever is broken, you can be objective. You can begin to explore the feelings. Ain't easy to do, but I think it's the only way to eventually get past it. And then there is a surrender. There is a surrender to life. And the other side of that surrender is the faith that the surrender will produce the peace, right? Of not having to control things, of knowing that it's going to be okay. And that is surrendering to whatever it is, whether that's God or the Tao or something else, the flying spaghetti monster, whatever it is that resonates for you. Being able to surrender to that is probably the ultimate cure, and to have the faith in yourself that whatever these fears are probably not ever going to come true, but you can handle it, man. You can handle stuff. This is the thing. It's about control, and it's about a fear that you can't deal with whatever might happen. So you surrender that and you trust, right? And then you build up your armor emotionally, mentally, to recognize that you can deal. You can deal if and when, and that is so hard to do. And sometimes the first step is just being distracted by a chicken party so you can be more objective about things and just feel better. Just a temporary relief from that awfulness is so welcome. It's so freaking healthy. And then you can maybe get some sleep. I didn't intend to do 40 minutes on anxiety. Thought maybe I'd talked about it for 15 and I was going to do another thing. But you know what? We did okay. And I think this is important. And I think it's important that we're talking about this stuff, all right? Now, if you are out there and you have the dragon, man. If you're riding the dragon's riding you. You know, let me know. Maybe I can point you in the direction of some resources. But understand, there is help out there. There's help on YouTube. There's help in podcasts like Anxiety RX, which I talked about last week. You know, taking steps is important. You know, if you have a great fear, one of the things you can do is just take a step to confront it just a little bit, right? And taking the step gives you back a sense of control. Feels like you can, because it's all about a loss of control, man. It is all about a loss of control. And for people who are anxious, losing control is death. Losing control is death. We can't do that. It's the greatest fear. And so taking a step to mitigate a loss of control can be really, really, really helpful. And, you know, maybe I can help you think about a step or something like that. I don't know. But if you need to express it to somebody, you know, express it. If not to me, then to somebody else. Because people can help, man. Sometimes it just really helps to talk it out. And if you can do that with a licensed therapist, so much the better. I haven't even done the Patreon plug. Can you do the Patreon plug in Noir? I was trying to offset my costs. Didn't want to run commercials. I thought maybe I'd let people volunteer to support the show. Then I met this platform called Patreon. And Patreon said, hey man, let the people come for $5 a month. Warm your cockles. Support your program. And that's the way it works on Patreon, all right? Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. $5 a month. You can support the show that way. I really don't want to run ads on this program, which is why I've gone the Patreon route, because it's voluntary. All right? Patreon does not require you to listen to ad reads or anything like that, or all the ads that you're sick of hearing on podcasts. I don't want to do that. I don't want to subject you to that. But if you want to support the show, and I really hope you do, Patreon is a way to do that. It's $5 a month. I'm garbling the Patreon plug because I tried to do it in a clever way. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. I want to thank all the people who have done that so far. If you don't want to support on Patreon, that's cool. The podcast will remain free and accessible wherever you enjoy fine podcasts. You can support me by sharing these episodes, giving me ratings and reviews on your preferred podcast platform would be lovely. Please, if you haven't, take 5 seconds, click 5 stars, please 5 stars. And if you've got a minute and a half, just drop a little review. Warms my cockles, man. Lets me know that you're out there listening, because it can be hard to tell sometimes, all right? Share the episodes. You can find me on Instagram, John Huff Podcast, TikTok, John Huff Podcast, Facebook, The John Huff Podcast. I want to thank you so much for all of your support so far, and I really do appreciate it. Patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. Now, the bulk of this episode was going to be this episode in history. Running out of time for that. But I will say this. I didn't find anything in the year 127 AD or BC worth talking about. Nothing in the year 1127 worth talking about. But the year 1927. All right. There was a movie released called It. Not about a clown. The movie was called It, and it starred Clara Bow, star of silent films in the 1920s. The Flapper era, kids. I was going to do a whole episode about the Flapper era, but we'll put that in our back pocket just for now. Clara Bow was considered maybe the first and preeminent sex symbol of the silent movies. She even made it into a couple of talkies before she retired, man. And this woman had kind of an horrendous life. Her mom had severe mental problems, mental health problems. I'm not being flippant, obviously, if you've listened to the rest of this episode. Mom had severe mental health problems, and at one point kind of dragged 16-year-old Clara Bow out of her bed with a knife to her throat. They took Mom to an asylum, and then Dad may have sexually assaulted Clara when Mom was away. It was a bad scene, dude. Clara Bow went on to become a star of silent films and this great sex symbol, and she was epitomizing the flapper era of the 1920s, which is a fascinating movement to look at. A fascinating fad to look at in the 1920s, man. After the First World War ended and the kids went crazy for lots of, logical freaking reasons. And then the Depression came and all the fun was over, man. 1927, the movie It. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because that is the film that popularized the notion of the It girl. You've heard this before. It's like, she is the It girl. Now, that has different connotations wherever you go. All right, in America, the It girl is kind of this girl who became famous for being a socialite, and she's beautiful, and she's rich, and she's provocative, and she's sexy, and she's popular, and she's the It girl, man. Now, over in England, apparently that had a slightly less ribald connotation. Yes, probably a socialite, but perhaps more demure, perhaps more sophisticated, perhaps less promiscuous. In any case, if you were an It girl, you are the girl that had it, that elusive je ne sais quoi that makes you endlessly appealing and attractive to both men and women back in the 20s, and now to whichever gender you identify. If you're an It girl, you've just got that elusive it. And this term was popularized by the movie It, starring Clara Bow in 1927. How about that, kids? She's got it. And I've not seen this film, but who knows? Maybe it's a freaking masterpiece. Clara Bow, everybody. Star of silent movies in the flapper era. The original It girl. So now you know where that comes from. And that is really why you tune into this program, man. There was more I was going to say. I'm not going to now because I went longer than I intended to. On your anxieties, etc. Riding the dragon, man. I'm going to sign off now. I want to thank you for listening this far. If you did, I hope everybody is well. I'm doing okay. I'm working my way through it, all right? I'm sorting it out. We go through this stuff to come through the other side better, stronger, wiser, man. And then your obligation, I think, is to share that wisdom. So if I'm accumulating it, I'm going to try and share it here with you, my friends. I hope you're well. Do enjoy this week. Do something freaking fun. And do it with people you freaking enjoy. And tune in to watch the Arsenal win the Premier League. Kids, thank you so much. Gonna shut up, shutting up, gonna go now. And hey, I'll check you later. Yeah.
We are top of the league. Say we are top of the league. We are top of the league. Say we are top of the league. We are top of the league. Say we are top of the league. We are top of the league. Say we are top of the league.